Back to the Dean Obeidallah show. Right now, very happy to have back on the show Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, a Democrat representing New Mexico's 1st District, serves on the House Oversight Committee, House Committee on Natural Resources. Representative, great to see you. Thanks so much for being on.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you're in New Mexico, and the laws are probably mostly written 2020, 2017, around that time. Your neighboring state of Arizona, the laws were written in 1864. So that's the new law that bans abortion. And the Republicans, what's lost in the media coverage, which is bad, Republicans push for this in the Supreme Court. The Alliance Defending Freedom, where Mike Johnson used to work as a lawyer, the speaker, that's the organization that made this happen. This didn't happen in a vacuum. But what's your reaction to, in Arizona, the Republicans have taken Arizona back to 1864?
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, this week, Arizona, their court system with a Trump appointed judge decided that not only should women not have bodily autonomy over their own rights, their reproductive rights, they took us back to a time before women could vote, before the end of the Civil War, before slavery had been abolished by the House of Representatives, and before Arizona was even a state. That's the thing that's particularly outrageous on top of all of the infringements on our rights. But I think it's really important that people understand that this is part of a long-term strategy that Republicans have been working on for decades, and which Donald Trump helped to execute by appointing his Supreme Court justices. So, the organization that you mentioned had been in the trenches for decades trying to get a court that would repeal Roe versus Wade. It was a very explicit strategy. And now that group, along with its allies, are bringing all of these court cases and advancing efforts at the state level to put abortion bans either into place or to reactivate old laws like that 1864 law, which was dormant. And in New Mexico, I'll note that we actually also had an abortion ban that was on the books, had been placed there in 1969, but we were very fortunate. I was serving in the legislature at the time. The writing was very clearly on the wall during the Trump administration that they were going to make this play for the Supreme Court. And so in 2021, we succeeded in actually removing that antiquated abortion ban from New Mexico's books. And as a result of that, abortion is not only protected in New Mexico, we were also able, through our governor and the legislature this last year, to expand protections and to help support the healthcare infrastructure.
So what is your sense of what their end goal is? Is it a total ban on abortion across the country with no exceptions? Is it also coming for certain forms of birth control they don't agree with? Is it just stripping women of any fundamental civil rights so they have to look for agency from a man? I mean, where does this go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the real question. I don't think there's any one single answer. But, as my mom always used to say, you got to listen to people when they tell you who they are. And they've been telling us for years that they want to ban abortion. And Donald Trump himself has said it over and over again, and even bragged in his video saying that it should be delegated to the states, that he was the one who overturned Roe versus Wade. So it's clear this is part of his political alliance. Now, Donald Trump himself will say or do anything to get back in power.
Right.
And, he himself is on the record all over the map on abortion issues. And I think his own personal beliefs, which, I mean, personally, who cares what Donald Trump thinks about our bodies?
Right.
But for the, effects on our bodies, I don't even think he is anti-abortion, but he'll say it and he'll take actions to ban abortion because he knows that's what'll put him back in power. But then you have people like Speaker Mike Johnson, who is an avowed evangelical Christian, who is on the record talking about taking us back to the principles of the 18th century, when women couldn't vote, when people of color couldn't vote in this country, when we had chattel slavery. I mean, I think there are people in leadership in the MAGA Republican camp, like our speaker, who are devoted to this idea that women are inferior and should not have control over their own bodies. So it's a mixed bag, but the effect is ultimately that we are suffering the consequences.
And I'm telling you, Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury. Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had once with Geraldo Rivera when he had his book out. He's like, I know Trump. He's not as bad as what he's saying. I go, I only care about the words coming out of his mouth. I don't really care what he believes. And the words coming out of his mouth are making life very difficult at the time for many communities. He was in the White House. So like you're saying, it doesn't matter what he believes or what he's saying. And he said, literally, I'm the one that got rid of Roe v. Wade, was proud to do so. He said, I killed Roe v. Wade. I terminated Roe v. Wade. These are exact words. And in that video on Monday, his abortion infomercial, he said, I was proudly the person responsible for ending Roe v. Wade. So those are the words. That's all that matters. Do you expect to see Democrats on a national level playing commercials with Donald Trump's statements like this in all of the swing states?
Oh, absolutely. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's not already ads. I mean, he's his own worst enemy. I mean, the extreme decisions that happened in Arizona this week, Florida a couple of weeks ago, I mean, he set off a bomb that is now rolling in all these states with conservative governments right now. And what we're seeing is every week as this goes on, millions and millions of American women are losing the right to control their own bodies. And I think it's also noteworthy, a lot of people have not been tracking the Supreme Court case that was just heard a couple of weeks ago, but there's a case in front of the Supreme Court on medication abortion, questioning the FDA's decision after decades of study that it's safe and authorizing its use and expansion that could also constrict use of medicated abortion all over the United States, including in states like New Mexico, where it is safe and legal. And, I think a lot of people talk about abortion in a very abstract way. When you hear the heart-wrenching stories of women experiencing miscarriages who are being turned away from hospital emergency rooms, of women who are traveling hundreds of miles, having to leave work and their families to get life-saving care. I don't think people really understand that what we're talking about is the safety and lives of women across America. And, to your earlier question, what is it all about? It is about controlling women and controlling women's bodies. And I think the president put it very clear during his State of the Union that this country is about to find out what the voting power of women in this country looks like, because we're mad.
And do you have any doubt, regardless what Trump believes, if he were to win and the Republicans got the House and the Senate, if they passed a 6-week national abortion ban, that he would sign that?
Of course he would. Of course he would. I mean, his deal with the devil, and frankly, a very real sense, is that he has put together this coalition of, Freedom Caucus folks who have an ideological commitment to certain ideas about our democracy and our institutions or lack thereof, the evangelical right, who he's promised things in the Middle East as well as abortion to, and to the business community, economists and investors who like his tax policies. And so really it's a coalition between the rich, evangelicals, and folks who believe in these very, in my opinion, antiquated ideas about freedom and male superiority in our country. And so he'll do whatever it takes to get to power and hold power. And I don't think you can believe a single thing that comes out of his mouth, but it's all very wink, wink, right? Like he's certainly telling his donors or whoever wants to hear it that he will sign an abortion ban. And I think if he does come back into the presidency, that is one of the greatest threats that we can expect.
I agree. And let's shift gears to something that I saw a clip of yourself on the House floor talking about the veterans and outdoor accessibility bill that you sponsored, a bipartisan legislation. Can you share a little bit about what it will do if hopefully it passes the Senate as well?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people should know is that in spite of all of the insanity that you see every night on the news, there is still a lot of bipartisan work happening behind the scenes in Congress, especially on issues like the outdoors, around healthcare issues and other things like that. And so we just passed a bill unanimously out of the House that is an outdoor recreation bill. And it included my bill, which is to help increase accessibility in our national parks and our public lands for veterans, people living with disabilities, and our elders, because we know that the great outdoors is connected to culture, it's connected to who we are, it's a place where we go for solace. And so I worked on that bill with a colleague of mine across the aisle from Arizona, and fingers crossed it will hopefully get across the finish line soon.
I hope so. And it's also interesting to hear that there is still bipartisanship on certain issues that go on, because what makes the headlines, of course, is the opposite, is the dysfunctionality. And this House GOP is so dysfunctional. And you can look at Marjorie Taylor Greene and it's not just her, it's some of the Freedom Caucus people. Their goal is to tear things down or to get on television. It's not to help people. I don't even know why they run for office. I'm not being naive. Like, go try to be a celebrity or something. But I guess it's the only way they can try to do it is through this, unfortunately. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that unfortunately, if you look at it, Donald Trump helped to elect, I think the last number I saw was over 70 members of Congress, and it has really changed the tenor of the way in which people serve because leadership matters. And when you see someone in a leadership position who doesn't care about the rules, doesn't care about the institutions, and is just about getting attention, it really sets the tone as the party leader. And I'm an optimist. I like to think the best of my colleagues, and I actually have great relationships even with some of my colleagues in the Freedom Caucus, and we get some work done together. But I think unfortunately the current leader of the party is mentally unstable and dangerous to this country and undermining our democracy. And people are following that. And those who don't subscribe to that way are afraid to speak out or take alternative actions because they know they'll be taken out of office.
it's a sad reality. I mean, Donald Trump should have been arrested a short time after January 6th, or as soon as he left office, like they would do in other nations to swiftly defend their democracy or their republics. And instead, at least we have a trial starting here in New York Monday. I mean, we're doing what we can in New York. So to shift gears again, you signed a letter recently and we've talked about Gaza before, and, you expressed a lot of concern for the humanity of the people, the Palestinians and the Israelis. And that gets lost often. But this time you signed a letter to President Biden, Secretary Blinken, to withhold offensive military support to Israel until there's a full independent investigation of the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers. And just a short time ago, CNN was reporting one of their journalists and several others were shot in Gaza in military. They were covering it there. So, I mean, this is continuing what's happening. There are innocent people being killed in Gaza, along with sometimes I'm sure they do kill some Hamas people, but it seems like it's the innocent people that we keep reading about. What do you want to see? Like, what would you like to see going forward here in Gaza?
It's heartbreaking to watch it unfold every day. But I think we were just talking about Trump. I think Netanyahu is of an equal, if not more evil level of leader. And I think, the whole world in many respects was behind Israel after the Hamas attack on October 7th. Mm-hmm. And he squandered the goodwill of the world by his offense and his military execution in Gaza, which has left 2 million people devastated and starving. And the recent killing by the military under his leadership of aid workers, which is still unclear if they were intentionally targeted or not, I think raises questions about what his intentions are, what he's trying to accomplish, whether or not they will achieve any goals that they have with regards to Hamas and the ultimate execution of this. And it has left, millions of Palestinians in absolute destitute hunger and starvation. And it's just completely unconscionable. So, I joined Nancy Pelosi and now I believe over 50 or 60 members of the House and calling on the administration to say, we're not going to give you any more offensive weapons until you can demonstrate that you are following international and domestic law. There are checks within the U.S. military system and how arms are transferred, but the targeting of food aid workers in the midst of a famine is completely unconscionable. It's evil. So, what would I like to see? I would like to see the people of Israel, have a free and fair democratic election and choose a different leader. And I think much of the democratic leadership in the United States feels that way. But at the end of the day, I don't think we should be giving any more offensive weapons to a evil person who is executing an unjust war. So.
Well, I so appreciate that. And I hope it has an impact on the policy going forward, because on the one hand, we're providing humanitarian relief and we'll do airdrops and maybe they'll disappear. And the other, the Biden administration saying okay to a massive sale of F-15s and other sophisticated weaponry. And I know some of it's to defend against the threat of Iran, and that I completely get. And that's, I think most Americans will be completely fine with that. If it's defensive and it's going to
Mhm.
even be a deterrent to an actual war. But under Netanyahu, I mean, they're on the verge of expanding this, and that there's threats just now. I just read that there might be an attack by Iran on Israel
Yeah,
proper over the weekend. And let's hope not, because this could escalate quickly
yeah.
into a regional conflict that would be horrific for everybody there. And Netanyahu is steering this ship and it doesn't seem he cares what President Biden says. I think he cares a little bit, but not that much. He's about self-preservation.
Mhm.
So that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what the Biden administration has been trying to do for the last 6 months is to strike a balance between our regional responsibilities and our commitments for maintaining order and peace in the Middle East, and this very real domestic and, you know, advancing threat that is happening in Gaza. And I think that how do you have an allyship with a foreign country where the leaders are conducting an unjust war at the same time you're trying to defend the country and its people? And I think that is the true root of where the US has really struggled, because we do stand with Israel. They are our ally. We care deeply about the Israeli people culturally, as a political ally, as a military ally, and of course for the suffering of the people of Israel who were attacked by Hamas. But that cannot be used by a politician for, executing an unjust military war on another people and threats of taking their land. And so it's a really difficult situation. I think when we look back on this moment, we'll have a lot of self-reflection about what the US did and what actions it took and how we spoke out. But I also think that we're in this very perilous moment with respect to peace around the world. And if the US does not defend its allies, whether that is ensuring that we don't have the spread of Iranian backed militants throughout the Middle East, that includes, addressing the threat of China invading Taiwan and its neighbors in the Pacific, and of course, defending Ukraine and making sure that Putin doesn't expand a land war in Europe. I mean, we're just at this very perilous moment, but we also have to be responsive to the humanity and our responsibilities as a humanitarian nation.
It is a very difficult time. Last question, turning back to New Mexico, how have the Biden policies helped the people of New Mexico? What have you seen?
Well, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I think the number one issue that all people think about is ultimately, how do they thrive? How do they put food on the table and a roof
Right.
over their head? And right now, everyone's struggling. We're still coming out of the pandemic, and, inflation is still happening, and housing prices are out of control, and food prices are high. And, a lot of people, we're grateful that we're outside the pandemic, but we're still feeling the lingering effects of it, as well as, inflation that's been driven by decisions of the Fed and foreign wars driving fuel prices and food prices. But, the Biden administration, I believe that when we again look back in history, we'll see this moment very similar to the way we saw the New Deal after the Great Depression or the Great Society of Johnson. Because if it had not been for the American Recovery Plan passing in the spring of 2021, I believe that we would have seen a catastrophic meltdown of the US economy and millions of
Yeah.
people losing their livelihoods and their homes. So when people ask, how did the Biden administration help the American people and New Mexicans? He had saved us from an economic catastrophe that would have destroyed the lives of millions of people. Now, it's been an uneven recovery. We do have extraordinary growth of small businesses. The economy is growing. We passed the CHIPS Act. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We passed the PACT Act. And in New Mexico, all of those bills that we passed the last 3 years have translated literally into thousands of jobs. We've got the largest Intel plant expansion in North America happening. We just cut ribbon on the largest wind project in North America in my district.
Wow.
We just cut ribbon on the first repatriation or reshoring of a solar manufacturer to the United States in my district. And we just cut ribbon on a major wind turbine factory. All of that was made possible by the legislation that the Biden administration and the last Congress passed, and the millions of veterans who are now getting care because of the PACT Act. So, I mean, the Biden administration, I believe, has done more than probably any president, certainly in my lifetime, in advancing just the economic stability and opportunity of working Americans than probably anyone since Johnson and the Great Society.
I so appreciate that you broke it down for people as well, because sometimes people talk about legislation is helping people and there's ribbons being cut, but you talk specifically about your state and your district. And that really is very helpful for people. And I hope that as more people see that and the Biden administration is able to get the credit they deserve for championing that legislation in the last Congress. And I can only imagine if we had kept the House, how much more legislation could have been enacted in this 2 years that would have helped people with the Senate. Unfortunately, not happening. So, well, Representative Stansbury, thank you so much for being on. It's great chatting with you. Have a great weekend and look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.